Hey everybody. In JavaScript, we're able to use higher order functions pretty much everywhere. For instance, when you want to set a callback, you're using a higher order function. You also use it in an applicative manner. So like, let's see. When you're trying to map something, you also are using a higher order function. And some of these are what might be known as applicative uses of higher order functions, which is basically where you're taking a function and then you're executing it. But it turns out that you can also have functions that return functions. And in that case, what you're doing is you're composing functions or creating combinators. So things that look kind of like this, where you have a function, and what does it do? It returns another function. It's pretty awesome. So you can do really interesting things with that. So for example, if you're trying to map over a collection and you want to get the properties from each element in the collection, you're going to have to do something like this, where, like I have a flock of birds, I want to get all their feathers. So what I can do is pluck the feathers with a function that returns a function. But what about functions that take functions and return functions, aka combinators? They look sort of like this. It turns out you can compose functions. So you can say, like, I want to pluck all the feathers, and then I want to dye them blue. And then that sort of describes the way that those two things go together. So there's this interesting library called JavaScript elongase, which is a sort of a utility belt of a whole bunch of different combinators that you can play around with. It includes things like currying, decorator functions, composing functions, and it has a lot of interesting tools. So you can do like, so currying is where like you can take a function and set one of its parameters to a particular thing and return a function that just sets that parameter. You can actually do that in order, so you could say like set the first parameter to something and then have the rest of the parameters be defined by the next call, or you can do all sorts of interesting things with that. So you should really check out this library because it's very cool. Thanks.
All right. So this is kind of like anecdotal results from a survey I've been running the last couple of years. I've been programming professionally since 1991. My first job where I worked with a woman as a developer is the one I started last December. That came up several years ago that that hadn't happened, so it has engendered some interesting conversations. One of the important ones is, with an experience like I've had, as a developer, it's easy to question whether or not I even know what a developer looks like. It's easy to presume that a developer looks like me or the people that I've worked with. And when I do meet developers who, incidentally, are also women, it's not too hard for a developer like me, who hasn't worked with very many women, to treat them like a unicorn. So I've been collecting for a couple of years now this survey data in an informal way. It's really anecdotal. I'll share some of the results. Today, though, I'm kicking off a more formal survey, only slightly more formal, but I'm dog-fooding the product for the company I work for, which is Pure60, who is obviously providing some of the technology behind it. So I have a bunch of cards that have a survey link on them, and I'm hoping that you might go to it. It's really simple questions about the people that you've worked with. So I want to share some of the results from the survey that has been going. So this person said that he had worked with 3 women and 150 men. He commented that the finance environment was particularly repugnant and would have benefited from more diversity. This next person said he had worked with 5 women and 200 men, but only if he includes the women who worked on teams with him in college. This person said he had worked with less than a half a dozen women and 18.237 metric buttloads of men. This woman said she has always been the token female developer, every team. She's worked with over 60 men. This woman said that she'd worked with 3 other women, hundreds of men, and that she's been called a unicorn before. This woman said, no other women, countless men. I work with myself sometimes. Does that count? 12 women, well over 100 men. I've worked with 11 female developers and one that switched sides, male to female. Sucks that that's a high number on average. This person says, I've never worked with a woman developer, but I'm married to one. This man says, back home in Sweden, the percentage of women in this culture is still incredibly low. 0 to 5% seems to be the norm. When I moved from Sweden to work in South India at a small company, while the seniors were 75% men, 80% of the new recruits were all women. So I would have to say that the trend in India regarding women in software development is improving quickly. He said they had worked with 8 women and 75 men. This woman says, 1 woman, over 50 men. I've only ever worked with 1 woman in 12 years. Also, I've never worked with a person of color. I'm a woman, so I've always counted for at least 1 on my teams, says another person. 0 women developers in all my life. That's after almost 10 years of job experience, worked in Croatia, Slovenia, Spain, as well as part-time contracting gigs, some remote. I've only met female developers at conferences. For the first few years of this, I was convinced this was proof women can't program. Now I'm carbon offsetting my stupidity by helping with programming workshops for women. I just want to say that it's a little bit tricky even doing a lightning talk on this as a straight white guy. I don't want to solve this problem myself. I don't want to be a leader in solving this. But then I also learned about unicorn law, which is that any woman working in open source will eventually give a talk on being a woman in open source. And I thought, okay, well, if the unicorn law is working both ways, let's let it work both ways with me too. All of us, we're building the world that we live in. We're changing our culture. Obviously, if we're a homogenous group that's not a representative part of the people who are going to be experiencing and living in that culture, we need to involve everyone. It's not a job for a homogenous group of, well, straight white dudes or people too closely related to each other. So seeing our community of developers richly is a small part of making that community more diverse. So that's the part that I'm working on, and I hope that you'll help by participating in the survey. Oh, by the way, the slides are from a Twitter list that I curate called Women in Tech. I apologize, some of them are scientists and mathematicians. Most of them are developers.
I wanted to quickly demonstrate using Middleman as a middleman for JSBin. So who uses JSBin to share code or examples or anything like it? JSFiddle, JSBin, Plunker, that kind of stuff. Okay, so one of the frustrating parts about it, well, first off, this is, I'm trying to write a bunch of Ember test examples. And I started off by hopping on JSBin, and I created a template on there, and then I started working with that. There's some issues with it that made me kind of grumpy, which are the versioning isn't very good. Collaborating isn't very good as far as, hey, check this out. What do you think about this code? Make changes. It's not as easy as a GitHub. And then the console debugging, as you guys know, is not the best. So enter Middleman, which I know this is a JavaScript conference, but Middleman is a Ruby gem. But I wanted to show you how I'm using it to solve the problem, to be able to build JSBin examples using Middleman so that I can pump it back up to JSBin. So a quick note about sprockets. Middleman uses sprockets, and sprockets will take all of your different asset files and compile them down, concatenate them, and compress them. And it's something similar to what Broccoli or Grunt can do. It uses manifest. So here's my JavaScript manifest. And inside of it, I can require all of the dependencies. So it will take all of those files, concat them into one file called all.js. So here's my CSS file. It takes all of the CSS files I include, add a little bit extra. And then I just wanted to show you what I've done, which will probably make a lot more sense. So I'm trying to create a bunch of examples, like I said. I'm helping out on their documentation. And so the way I can create a new Ember, so I wanted to create a full Ember application, but I wanted to have a link to it from the index page so I can kind of catalog them and whatnot. So I just do bin generate, and then it asks, okay, what do you want to call it? And my super app, what title? My super app. Do you have a JS bin? Nope. All right, so it creates all the files that I need. So now if I come here and I refresh, I click my super app, I have a fully running QUnit test with the application stubbed out. What that gives me is 3 files. It will give me a my custom app, my super app here. And this top part is what they call a front matter. And so here I can place the JS bin URL, and then it will link on the app, which I'll show you in a sec. But inside here are all of my handlebars templates, which pretty simple. So I can go through it and change them around. Then I have my app. So in JavaScript apps, creates a new folder called my super app. So I got an app and then tests. So because I had a lot of shared setup for my app, I used this right here, which is also something that Middleman allows. So it allows me to require external files. So I can show you my app setup. It's really simple, just that. And then my test that it creates, it calls shared integration setup, and in there, I just have some basic setup stuff. This bottom part is more of a helper for me, but so that's what it does. And here in the browser, I can refresh and view the source, and you'll see that it has everything in there. So here's my all.js, which has all of my vendor stuff. Here's my app, and here is my test. And the one thing, I'm about out of time, but the one thing that is really nice is you can publish to JS bin. Just kidding, you can't. Not yet. But I asked them about that, and this is what they said. Hey, can I get an API key? Because they were talking about it. Not yet. Work is being prepped for that, so it'll be released soon. That's why. So anyway, hopefully you'll see. Well, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm Coderberry, and thank you.
Hi, everyone. I don't have any slides, just some code to show you, okay? But in our world of lovely JavaScript, and as us being JavaScript developers, I think we'd make really good puzzle putter-togethers, because there are so many modules and so many pre-made pieces of code out in the world and on GitHub that my first response to things tends to be, I bet you there's a package for that, so I'll download it, and I'll spend the next 3 days figuring out how to fit it into my setup. And we were suffering from this at the company where I work, Space Monkey. I was doing some local testing of our web app. It wasn't just a static page. We had to request to our API running on the staging servers. And so I tried to use Yeoman. Yeoman's great, but it set up Grunt with an Express backend, which would serve my pages for me. But those pages didn't know how to talk to the API. So what we had done is we had set it up to use XIP.io to send our requests back to localhost, which we were running Nginx, which would take the request, reverse proxy it, and send it over to our staging server. But then we started having problems with that because when I went into the staging server code, I realized that we had locked down our cores to only accept requests from spacemonkey.com. So my localhost XAPIO got rejected every time. And believe it or not, it took me like 3 days to realize that's what was going on. And then I was like, what? So I knew there was a better way. And what I did was popped open. I don't think you can see my, oh, thanks. I don't know if you can see my mouse there. But point being, oh, it's because it's over here. I'm sorry, you guys, I can't even scroll. There you go. So popped open a node script. And instead of using Grunt, instead of using a module that someone else had programmed and generalized and abstracted to fit all situations, I thought, why don't we just make something specific to us that doesn't have to ever be reused anywhere else? And within a couple hours, I had imported just Connect. I had imported Connect and the request module, and I had written a custom reverse proxy server to pretend, to eliminate the need for Nginx, so that no developers would have to install it on their computers just to develop. And that reverse proxy server then, I should have quit my email. That reverse proxy server no longer needed to worry about cores at all, because I put it under a sub-URL. So my requests went to space localhost 9000/API/whatever. So the browser no longer complained about localhost. But the great thing about this is then I started to run into some funniness with Angular, where I thought, it's kind of annoying that I have to add a route to my server config and a route to my app every single time. So I said, well, in our development server, let's just put a little pattern like we have in production that says, you can see it here, not if you can read it, that it goes to check to see if the files are on the server. And if they are, then it sends it through to the file. And if they aren't there, then it sends it right back to the app for routing. Well, that's great, and that took me a few minutes to do. And then later on, I said, well, we could really use some mock endpoints that we don't have developed in the API yet. Well, that's simple enough. I just went in, required mock backend, and with some Node code in a couple hours, we had a bunch of new mock endpoints that would just respond with JSON, so that our UI developers, our front-end guys, could finish everything up, or could finish up all the development work without having to wait and be blocked on the API developers. So the point of this speech is to say, we don't always have to use the puzzle pieces. Sometimes a couple days or a few hours with Node or with your code of choice, writing a non-reusable custom script can be the answer to all of our problems. And that's it. Thank you.
My name is Brad Midgley, and I'd like to tell you about a little experiment I'm conducting on my children. So we got an exciting book called 3D Game Programming for Kids. So it's founded on using 3JS, and of course 3JS, one of its really cool selling points is it can hook into WebGL. So let me show you what we came up with when we did this. It loves to run in Chrome. I think we're back. Okay, so this is their impressive editor. It's a companion to the book, their online JavaScript editor. I like this. The only thing that would make it nicer is if I were teaching my kids CoffeeScript. But in any case, let's continue. I'll just turn this on. So it'll give you an overlay of the thing that you're building in your JavaScript. So in under 200 lines of code, we have a robot ghost with shadows and smooth shading. But I try to tell my kids this is really impressive to have a 3D object, to have it cast shadows, to have it shiny, and you can hear crickets chirp when you tell kids something like this. But if they can make it do stuff, then that changes everything. So one of the things that I recommend you do on anything like this is make it interactive. And I wanted to show you something that got me thinking about this. So you have a lot of the power of WebGL is exposed in 3JS. So one of the things that gives you is you can do things like have multiple cameras. And usually that isn't necessarily very interesting, but I just want to show you something. And everyone's going to have to use their imagination, okay? So on a 3D television, when you punch the button that says go into 3D stereoscopic mode, it will merge these two images and it'll give you the ghost popping out of the screen. So we thought that was really fun. And what you do is you put two cameras in the scene. You have to have them pointed at a distant point, so you have them converging. And then in 3JS, it makes sense to attach those to an object so that you can move the whole camera rig in one operation. And to show that off, that's down here. There are only a couple of tricks involved, like the scissors. You use WebGL scissors or OpenGL scissors so that you can confine what the camera renders to one side of the screen. So back to this. That makes me think we need to have more shapes, because having a robot ghost is not the most interesting character, you know. There are some shapes that are provided, or some methods that are provided by 3JS, and one of those is the lathe, where you can give it a linear function, and it'll basically tell you or give you a shape that's the result of lathing that thing, just spinning it and giving you that profile. That gives you something that's long and thin or whatever. And then the other more interesting one is an extrusion, where you can give it a function in 3 dimensions, and you give it a profile of an object as it follows that function. So these, again, are I like the comparison. It's painting with poetry, right? And then finally, this whole thing makes me think, why doesn't JavaScript have a way to ask the system to give you stereoscopic full screen? So this would be a cool thing. And if it were in the browser, it could go down to the hardware layer and it could go over the HDMI bus and do the handshake with the display and say, I want 3D. Can you give me 3D? Yes, no, whatever. So maybe someday we'll get that as well. That's it. Thanks.